There's more domestic drama in half an hour when we take our usual peep over the fence at the neighbours, here on BBC One.
The 1 o'clock news from the BBC with Michael Buerk.
Good afternoon. The Ford company has confirmed that it's dropped plans to build a new plant in Dundee and employ up to 1,000 workers because it couldn't reach an agreement to deal with just one British union. The engineering workers appealed to the TUC. If we can get our act together now, it may not be too late. The Yanks are coming. American troops pour into Honduras to prop up an ally in Central America. Prince Charles goes back to Cloisters as we report on the evidence that it was the royal party that set off the fatal avalanche. Ticket to Ride. The Soviets' first commercial flight blasts off into a blizzard. And here, Gatwick gets a second terminal, but has it been built at the expense of safety? The Ford Motor Company has confirmed that it's scrapping plans to build a £40 million electronics factory in Dundee because of a failure to get a single union agreement for the plant. It would have brought 1,000 jobs to Dundee, where unemployment is currently 15%. The engineering union had been negotiating a single union deal, but unions at Ford's other plants were bitterly opposed. In a letter to the engineering workers' leader, Gavin Laird, the American parent company says it wanted a plant that would be competitive in cost and quality. But this necessitated a deal with just one union. The letter continues, "We had not expected that this would prove so difficult to achieve."
For 5 months, Ford executives in Detroit watched as the British unions slugged out their differences over the proposed new plant in Dundee. Finally, they lost patience. This letter to Gavin Laird of the Engineers Union from Frank Marker of Ford's electronics division confirmed that they're scrapping the £40 million development. Mr. Marker wrote, the plan necessitated a single union, but after months of frank and open discussions, it's now clear that there's no prospect of reaching an understanding. Privately, the company have told Gavin Laird that the decision is irrevocable, but he says he's not giving up hope yet. He now wants the Transport Workers Union and the Scientific Workers Union to withdraw their objections to a single union deal.
Even this morning, I've been on to the TUC, and through the TUC endeavouring to get the two unions who were complaining at this very late hour to accept the reality of the single union deal. Now, if we can do that, Ford have already agreed that they're prepared to meet us, and I have already suggested to the TUC that I and we should go over early next week to Detroit if we can deliver something. No point in going over empty-handed. But even at this late stage, if the TGW and MSF will change their attitude, there's just that slim chance of saving the situation.
The engineers say an inter-union wrangle like this does nothing for the image of trade unions with the public or the government.
I'm personally dismayed by the fact that perhaps up to 1,000 people in Dundee, an area of high unemployment, have now lost their jobs as a result of unions squabbling over power and privilege.
What I hope is that the story isn't finished. This is a major operation by the Ford Motor Company in advanced technology. They would be investing a great deal of money. There is a readiness by the trade unions to continue to discuss it, as Norman Willis showed in his visit to Detroit last week.
Everything now depends on the response of the other unions, whether they're prepared to drop the objections they've maintained for the last 5 months in the next few days.
The real issue is that for 70 years Ford has been in Britain. There is a multi-union agreement, and that agreement covers all Ford's UK operation. Regrettably, one union has sought to break ranks and sign a single union deal with a company, and that means that we have to find a solution to a very difficult problem.
For the people of Dundee, all the signs at the moment are that neither the T&G nor the MSF are prepared to budge.
A few moments ago, I phoned John Emmett at Ford's head office in Detroit. I asked him how he responded to the argument put forward by some of the unions that the main issue wasn't a single union deal, but that pay rates in Dundee would have been lower than those at other Ford plants.
Well, I think the important thing is that we considered this an electronics plant and separate from our activities in Great Britain otherwise, or other motor industry activities. And in the electronics industry, that plant would have to carry its weight and be competitive. And so the contract that would have been negotiated would have had to have been competitive in the electronics industry.
How do you people in Detroit feel about the way the British unions have handled this whole thing?
Well, we're not placing blame anywhere. We're just disappointed that we can't go to Scotland.
Any chance at this late stage of you changing your mind?
In my opinion, there is no chance that a decision would be changed.
Mr. Emmett, thanks very much indeed. Well, also on the phone is Bill Morris of the Transport and General Workers Union. Mr. Morris, despite what Ford is saying, Mr. Laird of the engineers says there still might be some slight hope if only the unions can get their act together and agree a one-union deal. Are you going to be able to do that?
Well, the issue isn't about one union deal. The issue is about protecting and defending the jobs for Dundee at rates of pay consistent with those that apply in other Ford's UK plants.
But everybody else seems to think it's about a one-union deal. Ford thinks that, the Scottish Development Agency think that, the engineering union thinks that. That is the central issue, isn't it?
No, the central issue is that Ford has confirmed to Mr. Willis that the rates of pay in Dundee will be 50% less than what it is in other Ford's UK plants. As far as who represents the members are concerned, that can be decided by a ballot of the workers when they're employed.
Well, the central point is there going to be a change of attitude on behalf of the unions at this late stage to see if, after all, you might be able to get Ford back to Dundee?
Well, I think it's the Ford Motor Company that has to change its attitude. It's the Ford Motor Company who's pulled out of the deal. What we're saying to Ford, we want the jobs in Dundee, let's sit down and talk about it.
Thousands more American troops have arrived in Honduras in an apparent show of force following the fighting between Contra rebels based there and Sandinista troops from neighboring Nicaragua. This afternoon, the American move is to be discussed by the United Nations Security Council, and Nicaragua has claimed that Honduran aircraft bombed one of its army posts in the north of the country. Honduras says the raid was on a guerrilla airstrip on its own territory. The attack on Nicaraguan troops resulted in no serious casualties. The jets dropped the bombs near a Sandinista camp. Nicaragua says they fell on their side of the border, but Honduras insists they hadn't infringed Nicaraguan airspace. The Nicaraguans used helicopters to airlift soldiers to safety, along with journalists who've been covering the conflict. As many as 3,000 American troops are now stationed in Honduras, a move described by the Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega as provocative and threatening. Our correspondent Martin Bell reports.
Men of the 82nd Airborne Division on the 4-hour flight from North Carolina to Honduras. They weren't intended to go into combat, but they were certainly prepared for it. It was the biggest, fastest projection of American power into the region since the Nicaraguan Revolution. It was codenamed Operation Golden Pheasant. But the only birds flying were these droop-winged transport aircraft, bringing in 3,000 paratroopers and light infantry, supposedly on a training mission. But they were there because the president sent them and would do whatever he asked of them.
This is a high-speed division. We're the best, so we got to do it. We got to show them.
Well, we got to do what we got to do. We're prepared to stay as long as we need to stay, and we're prepared to execute the orders of our superiors, no matter what they are.
The orders of their superiors are to get no closer to the combat zone than Palmarola Air Force Base, which is more than 120 miles away. Their presence has doubled the American garrison there and has been asked for by the Honduran president. But not all Hondurans are so happy to see the Americans arrive.
Well, I think that the massive presence of the United States troops in Honduras only increases the tensions in the region. It jeopardizes the process of negotiations.
And in Managua, Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega was not at all conciliatory.
We are not going to decrease our military activity because the 82nd Division is in Honduras threatening Nicaragua. Instead, we will intensify the fight to defend the integrity of our country and every inch of our land.
And President Ortega's forces have the initiative. Though there are reports the Hondurans are fighting back, the Americans are too far away, and the Contras are taking a beating. This is Martin Bell for the 1 o'clock news in Washington.
Prince Charles returned to Switzerland today to visit his friend Mrs. Patty Palmer-Tompkinson, who was seriously hurt in last week's avalanche and is still in hospital. The Prince is expected to stay for a couple of days. Meanwhile, Swiss scientists investigating the accident say their findings indicate the royal party triggered the avalanche themselves, but they said it would be wrong to apportion blame. The legal investigation into the accident won't be completed for several weeks. From Cloisters, Michael Macmillan reports.